Those of you who follow my channel will know me as a pretty casual invader. In Elden Ring's Twilight, I have taken to almost exclusively invading with Limgrave-only characters, restricted to using early gear and upgrades. I have a lot of fun playing like this, but I don't think it's for everyone. For me, the fun comes from doing a lot with a little. I like restrictive playstyles, and I like the early parts of games, when the best you can do is pretty menial compared to the heights you reach in the endgame. When I'm playing Pokemon, I prefer Little Cup. In Souls games, I like low-level PvP. The novelty of these playstyles is one appeal, absolutely, but what is of near equal importance is their aversion, or at least shakeups, to metas. When I say meta, I assume most players understand what that means. For those who don't, meta in this context is referring to any playstyle that optimizes advantages regardless of what is presumed or intentional play. When invading, the developer's intention might be to make an invader who fits the theme of a powerful roaming enemy that the invaded host can't tell apart from the rest of the game's logic. For all intents and purposes, the invader could just be a well-tuned AI and the player can't tell the difference. But that doesn't stop players from making characters with meme names or nonsensical builds that manipulate every possible exploit and taunt their victims relentlessly. It doesn't stop them from hard swapping to the best choice for every moment of the battle, leveraging a level of practice and preparation that cannot be matched by the average player. Fighting someone who has mastered or otherwise exploits mechanics in these ways can be a very damaging experience, both from an immersion perspective and a playstyle one. It creates a skill gap that won't be easily overcome by anything other than a numbers advantage. And the argument can be made that the skill gap is often necessary so invaders can conquer being outnumbered. It's an argument I myself have made and generally agree with. And it allows for tighter optimization when going into duels, where the odds are otherwise about even. Rather than relying on random chance or a fluke to win, it comes down to who has a better mastery of a multitude of subsystems that exist beyond the standard levels of play. Metas exist in every game, and the deeper they go, the more time players invest. Many fighting games have a somewhat infamous reputation for requiring a substantially high degree of investment to be even remotely competitive, with techs and exploits the required norm. I used to think I was good at Super Smash Bros. Melee because I could beat kids in my neighborhood, only to later learn I had no idea what edgeguarding was, let alone how to wave dash. I thought you chose a character from your favorite franchise and used your tools to respond to different matchups, but in reality, all of your choices should be based on what the game failed to account for and how you can exploit those gaps to gain a competitive edge. Even outside fighting games, in RuneScape, I assumed getting the right skills and gear would make me a PvP god, but I was soundly humbled when I realized I didn't know how to perform proper gear or prayer swaps. Not realizing you need basic tick manipulation to optimize your damage and healing is a death sentence against anyone who does, and it means not only will you not win, but you're not even competitive. These meta skills, far deeper than what the games pitch as their primary appeal, define and constrict one of the most appealing aspects for anyone who wants to participate in competition. You need to know not only how to play the game, but how to play the spaces between. Which brings me to the conversation I want to have today. Does the meta ruin the PvP of Souls games? This is a topic I see approached by various players and creators, each with a different angle. Some people embrace the meta and make it their job to understand and manipulate it to their advantage. Others abhor it and do everything they can to compete without resorting to exploitative mechanics. Regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, the meta is a persistent force that governs your interactions in PvP, and if you want to enjoy it, you need to be at least aware of how it will affect you. Souls games are unique for many reasons, and how they handle meta play is among them. Even at the farthest ends of that spectrum, a player with no idea what they're doing versus a player who knows how to do everything, that player on the bottom can technically win. They aren't going to, but they could. Now, I understand that's a subjective take on an impossible number of situations, but please, hear me out. The action combat of Souls games is special because it favors defensive play in many key ways. You have a dodge roll that provides you generous immunity to attacks, and it's a tool that is both intuitive and easy to use. The only way to mess it up is to hinder your ability to roll by ignoring your weight thresholds, which have become more generous and easier to interpret as the series has progressed. Dodge rolling is so important to combat that a large part of meta play is understanding how to manipulate the dodges of other players for your own benefit. Roll catching is one such skill, and if you can't do it reliably, you're that much less likely to win. All players also move at the same speed, making chasing a common obstacle. You can't kill someone you can't catch, generally speaking. To that end, poking weapons take advantage of the peer-to-peer latency to greatly extend a chaser's range, giving them the advantage they need to effectively pursue and put down a target. And those are just common things in Elden Ring. In Dark Souls, if you didn't know how to execute and avoid backstab windows, you were in for a rough time. There are some great videos online about all the weird PvP exploits you can pull off, and it really changes how you view the modern system. Back in the day, Dark Souls relied on so many invisible metrics that any use of the more intuitive combat, like attacking, was way more likely to get you killed than your opponent. Over the years, FromSoft has worked to tune the system and make it something anyone can play without needing to sink dozens or hundreds of hours into. That time helps, obviously, but it isn't nearly as required as it once might have been. It's nothing short of a miracle in my eyes that anyone can pick up the game and pose a threat to someone who's been playing for more than a decade. Of course, that sort of development does have its drawbacks. I voiced my criticism for Elden Ring's simplistic approach to Ashes of War, letting players fly into the air and explode repeatedly while ignoring all other mechanics. It doesn't exactly level the playing field so much as change the game everyone's playing. Still, changes in that direction have done wonders for casual participants. I can never truly ignore my opponent, no matter how unskilled or clueless they might be, because fundamentally they pose a threat. To me, that's the mark of a great combat system. It's not perfect, not by a fucking mile, but I love the work done to shorten the gap between floor and ceiling, all while retaining a high degree of skill expression. But even after all they've done to adjust things, the meta remains an obstacle for many players. Elden Ring still has gaps in the system that allow players to exploit their way to new levels of danger. The amount of freedom given to equipment choice, along with the ability to change that equipment instantaneously, means there are limitless combinations that can be used to break combat. From an immersion standpoint, if you're battling someone and both of you are using longswords, then you can fight knowing you share the same strengths and weaknesses. If your opponent can, without even an animation, swap to a spear and exceed your reach, that puts a level of unpredictability into the encounter you can't just intuit. The same issue arises from more basic choices too. If you are both using greatswords but you chose the bastard sword and your opponent chose the iron greatsword, you chose wrong and will suffer accordingly. Some weapons are simply better than others, and not choosing the best puts you at a disadvantage. You might think, big deal, who cares? Every game has good and bad options, that's just part of it. To which I would say, you're right. Every game does have that sort of choice. There are always good and bad choices, and making them is part of the game. It doesn't have to matter. Except, it does matter. It steps on the toes of a much larger entity, the role-playing. If you want to use the bastard sword because you like the look, you can do so and make up the disadvantage with enough skill. But if you want to have an easier time, you need to disregard your role-playing desire and make a meta choice, one outside of the considerations of your immersion within the game. And it's that disregard for who we are as role-players that defines metas for me. For the record, I enjoy and embrace the less optimal choices that can be made in games, including PvP. I like that there are options that don't necessarily conform to typical play and create opportunities for variance. I don't want those to go away. What I would like to see changed is the disparity of those choices, and it's something Souls games have come remarkably close to achieving. It's worth noting that even while the Bastard Sword may be generally less optimal than other greatswords, it's still perfectly viable. And I would argue the same is true for basically every weapon in Elden Ring. Every category has its top performers and its bottom dwellers, but all of them remain viable. So is it even a problem that there are meta picks? If everything is at least viable, how much does it hurt to have optimal choices? Well, there's a complication there that I feel most people can understand but not always articulate. The best way I can think to explain it would be an analogy of tolerance stacking. It's not a problem when one or two things are slightly better than their peers, but it becomes a problem when 5 or 6 or 10 things all stack together and make for a much more optimal build. That optimal build against a viable one suddenly makes the latter a lot less viable. Elden Ring has this problem, as does every Souls game to some extent. If I choose the best-in-class weapon and pair it with the best-in-slot talismans, along with the most optimal buffs, physic tiers, and stat distribution, I may be as many as 10 degrees of separation from a less prepared opponent. Any one of my choices might only make a small difference, a few points of damage here, a few points of healing there, all small adjustments. But taken together, I might deal 10% more damage, take 20% less, and heal 30% more. There are so many points of articulation in a build that not leveraging all of them to their fullest has a compounding effect on viability, and that's not even considering exploits or techs. Hot take, I don't think you should be able to hard swap equipment. I think you should only be able to use the things you have equipped, and changing that equipment should be done at a hub. You get 6 weapon slots and they all factor into your weight threshold, so I see being able to freely change that loadout as an exploitation, however intentional, of that system. I believe firmly that having an infinite arsenal of weapons and armor at your disposal runs counter to many of the immersive aspects of Souls games, and while I respect the degree to which it can be leveraged, I would prefer it removed. Not only for my own preferences, but for the sake of competitive viability. I don't think there's any great appeal in the way it can be leveraged, and I think it detracts from the role I'm trying to play. And while I think the fact that hard swapping has been in the series the entire time means it's probably at least a little bit intentional, I don't believe the ways it can be utilized are seriously considered by the developers, and I don't consider it very different from something like Estus canceling in Dark Souls 3. Anything that exists because of a gap in a system qualifies as an exploit in my mind, and any game trying to be the best version of itself should work to remove those gaps where possible. But enough of the abstract. I want to zero in on the player experience and come to some conclusion about metas in PvP. For the typical Souls PvP participant, be they invader or host, does the meta have a ruinous effect on their relationship to the game? Does it dictate their behavior where they would otherwise self-govern? When I think about this question, I'm thinking about a host who knows how to play but isn't especially interested in PvP, or an invader who knows how to get a kill but doesn't necessarily want to get sweaty. Casual enjoyers of a game who want to meaningfully participate while keeping it casual. Honestly, I fall into that latter category more often than not. I am a casual invader by most metrics, and I don't want to succumb to only choosing the most efficient or exploitative options to win. I outright refuse to do so in many circumstances, and it's a big part of what pushes me toward low-level PvP. I want to optimize my character. That's what making a build is, but I don't want that optimization to come at the cost of role-playing. When I'm making a Limgrave-only invader, I will always choose the Scar Seal because it's an obvious and clear best-in-slot choice that does nothing to damage my ability to make the guy I want to make. But I also put Sacred Blade on my Nagakiba because the theme of my character is Twin Fangs, where they use 2 glowing katanas to fight. It's not the most optimal choice, and it provides only a modest boost to damage, but it's perfectly viable. And because of my self-imposed restriction, it's one of the better options at my disposal. Essentially, it's optimizing for a balance of theme and viability. The alternative would be outright twinking, using the best late-game gear to stomp early-game characters who don't have the opportunity to optimize. That sort of play is perfectly fun in its own right, especially when you consider the numbers disadvantage and complications of overleveled phantoms, but it's not the theme I'm going for as of late. I'd win more if I just used Scarlet Rot in Limgrave, but without the proper motivation to play that role, I'd be doing it for the wrong reasons. It's really no different from meta-level play, where picking something suboptimal in an already contentious uphill battle means turning a hard time into a bad time. If you aren't willing to do whatever it takes to win, you're at the mercy of your own abilities, along with everyone who is willing, and how the game balances those choices. What I'm trying to get at here is that, even as much as Souls games have closed the gap, meta play is inherently counter to roleplay. Making a meta choice will always disregard all other options, and that's never something an RPG should strive for. It gives people license to ignore role-playing and everything else the game offers for the chance at an easier or more consistent win. It gives their victims the chance to disregard the PvP system entirely because meta cheese is just too good to compete with. And all of it gets that much more complicated when you take the intentional imbalances into consideration. Invasions are meant to be an unfair battle for the invader that balances out with the contextual complications. Taking away meta optimization would mean removing a cornerstone of control high-skill players have to consistently winning fights. If they can't consistently win, they might invade less and the system could die. PvP needs depth and reliability for players to continually invest in it. It's a complex problem that comes down to those margins of error and degrees of separation. How much of a disparity is too much? How much is too little? These are difficult questions to answer, and frankly, I'm not qualified to answer them. What I can say is that we, as players, should strive to make meta play secondary to roleplay if we want to embrace these games as RPGs and reduce the view of PvP as a toxic cesspool of griefers and sweatlords. And not only for the optics, but for ourselves. Because meta play, however innocuous, can absolutely ruin PvP by taking away its purpose. Remember that invasions aren't esports worthy, and that's a good thing. It's an entirely different breed of PvP, and it's better for it. We shouldn't invade just to win. We should invade to be invaders. This is a big question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Meta play is a sticking point for so many players, so please let me know where you fall on the spectrum. Like the video if you hate meta play, dislike it if you think I should become a sweatlord, and subscribe to condemn me to the content mines for all eternity. Until next time, thank you for watching.